They say life slows down after 50, but for Martha June Whitlow, it had simply stopped. Once a baker's wife, now a wandering widow, with nothing but her name stitched into the hem of her worn shawl. She didn't own land. She didn't have family. And when the townsfolk looked at her, they saw someone whose story was already finished. But stories like hers don't end. They pause. They wait for the next chapter to be written, sometimes by the most unexpected hands. She was sitting alone in the chapel yard, clutching a worn handkerchief, when two little girls approached her barefoot sisters with eyes like prairie storms. And they whispered words no one had said in years. "You're the one we want for our father." Why would two motherless girls choose a stranger no one else wanted? What did they see in Martha that the rest of the world had long overlooked? And when their grieving, stone-faced father found out, did he accept their wish or shut the door on it like he had on everything else? Behind those whispers lies a story of healing second chances and the kind of love that doesn't bloom quickly, but roots itself so deep it never fades. Because sometimes what's broken isn't the woman. It's the world that forgot how to see her. So what happened when those whispers reached their father's ears? And how did Martha's quiet heart awaken a home that had long gone silent? Keep watching. This story isn't just about what was lost, it's about what was finally found. The hills outside Bozeman curled like sleeping beasts beneath a woolen sky. It had snowed too early that year. October wasn't supposed to bite like February. But there she was, boots cracked and coat too thin, dragging her life behind her in a split-handled wagon. Martha Elkins was not a woman who cried, at least not where anyone could see. She had shed her last public tear the day her husband was buried, and the preacher said she's a strong one. What no one asked was what strength had cost her. She'd tried the boarding house, but the landlady said too old for work, too proud for charity. She'd slept in the church cellar one night before Pastor Grayland said, "God loves you, but we don't take in strays." Her fingers were swollen and cracked from days of walking, but she still held onto a jar of preserves wrapped in a towel, the last thing from her old life she hadn't given away. Blackberry with her late husband's crooked label, "For my sweet even when bitter." She didn't know where she was headed anymore. She just knew that somewhere between the ache in her bones and the numb in her feet, she had started whispering prayers again. Small ones, mostly for rest. And that's when the wagon wheel cracked. The valley ahead was empty, save for a distant farmhouse and the thin trails of smoke curling up from its chimney like hope that hadn't quite died. She stared at it. Could she walk up, ask for warmth? Just for the night, she gripped the preserves. But before she could decide, two girls came running toward her from the fence line, one with dark braids and the other missing a shoe. Breathless, eyes wide. "You're her," one said. Martha blinked. "I beg your pardon." "You're the one we want," said the smaller one. "For our pa." The wind paused just for a moment, like the world itself was waiting. What kind of story begins with a broken wheel and a whisper from children? All her life she'd been assigned, instructed, led like an old mule leased for the winter. No one ever asked if she wanted to stay. But here now, two young girls were looking at her like she was a door to something warm, steady, and safe. The older girl, Sadie, eyes soft like rain-swollen lakes, held Martha's hand and said, "Papa says no one would ever want us." The younger Ellie, slight enough for the wind to carry, shook her head. "We think he's wrong." Martha blinked. "I'm not sure I understand." Sadie tugged her forward. "Papa's inside. He don't know we went to meet you, but he left the door open." Sure enough, the cabin at the end of the dirt path had its front door ajar, as if someone had left in a rush or hoped someone else would come in. Thin smoke coiled from the chimney. The air smelled of wood fire and something sweet, cinnamon maybe, and smoked meat, a scent Martha hadn't known since the last winter her husband was alive. Rufus Callahan was not a man of greetings. He barely glanced up from splitting logs when the girls ushered Martha into the kitchen. Then he returned to chopping wood as though no one had entered. "They invited you?" he asked, voice rough, not quite hostile. "We met on the road," Martha replied gently. "My wagon wheel broke." He looked at her again. "What's that in your hand?" She lifted the jar. "Blackberry preserves. I made it myself." He didn't smile, but he nodded. "Then sit. Supper's left over." The kitchen was small and warm. Sadie carefully placed roasted potatoes on Martha's plate, and Ellie leaned against her side like they'd known her for years. Rufus barely ate, but his eyes kept wandering to Martha's hands as she served the children. There was something in his gaze, not suspicion, not longing, but a quiet curiosity. The kind of look a man gives firelight after he's been burned, and still can't quite believe this one won't hurt. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep, Rufus said quietly, "They're not mine by blood. Their mother passed one snowy night. No one came to claim them, so I kept them." Martha looked down at her hands. She too had once been kept not out of love, but necessity. But these girls had chosen her. She lifted her chin. "I'll stay just the night. In the morning I'll go." Rufus took a sip of tea, not meeting her eyes. Wheels don't fix themselves. Snow's coming. And that was that. Not an invitation, not a dismissal. Just a silence wide enough to stay the night and maybe the next one too. Sometimes reunion doesn't mean meeting someone from the past, but finally being seen kindly in the present. Martha had meant to stay just one night, but one night turned to two, and two turned into a week. The wheel was still broken, or at least that's what Rufus said. But deep down, Martha suspected it wasn't the wheel that needed mending. It was something quieter, something inside them all. Still, her presence in the cabin shifted things like wind through tall grass, soft but undeniable. Sadie started brushing her hair again. Ellie began humming while she played with dried corn husk dolls. Even Rufus, though silent, no longer avoided the room when Martha was near. But kindness is not always a welcome thing, especially when a man's heart has been buried under snow for so long. One evening, while Martha kneaded bread in the small kitchen, Rufus came in with a pile of firewood and said stiffly, "You don't need to keep fixing everything." She paused, flour on her hands. "I'm not trying to fix anything, just trying to help where I can." Rufus didn't look at her. "I didn't ask for help." "No," she said quietly, "but the girls did." That silenced him. Later that night, she overheard him arguing with Sadie in the next room. "She's not staying," he snapped. "She's got her own life. She don't belong here. But we want her," Sadie whispered, her voice cracking. "Can't you see, Papa? We sleep better when she's here." Martha sat on the edge of her borrowed bed, heart twisting. She'd been cast aside before, left behind by people who needed her but didn't want her. She knew that ache. She knew it all too well. And yet, she wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to take anything that wasn't freely given. Not anymore. She folded her apron and laid it neatly at the foot of the bed. She would leave come morning. But the next morning the girls were gone. Tracks in the snow led toward the ridge behind the cabin. Rufus was already outside, boots tied, rifle slung. His face was pale as frost. "She must have taken them," he muttered. "That woman, she's just like the others." Martha stepped out behind him, calm and unflinching. "You think I'd take your girls in the night?" He didn't answer, but he didn't meet her eyes either. She pulled on her shawl. "Let's go find them." They climbed through wind and snow until they found them curled together in a cave above the tree line, crying quietly. "We thought you were leaving," Sadie said, wiping her eyes. Martha knelt and wrapped them in her shawl. "I was. But you didn't have to run," Ellie sniffled. "We were going to bring you back, like we did the first time." Rufus stood at the mouth of the cave, snow melting on his coat. He looked at Martha not with anger, not with pride, but with something more dangerous. Shame. Some struggles aren't loud. They're the ones where we war with what we think we don't deserve. The wind eased as they made their way down the ridge. Martha carried Ellie on her hip. Sadie walked beside Rufus, who kept his eyes on the path, but glanced back now and then at Martha, at the shawl wrapped around both girls, at the softness he couldn't seem to unsee. No one said much until the cabin came into view. That night, Martha laid the girls in their bed and kissed their foreheads, like it was the most natural thing in the world. When she turned to leave, Sadie gripped her hand. "Don't go," she whispered. Martha hesitated, then squeezed gently. "I won't. Not yet." In the quiet of the main room, Rufus sat by the fire shadows, casting long across his face. When Martha walked past, he said her name, not sharply, not to correct or command, just Martha. She turned. "I misjudged you." Her eyes stayed steady. That's all right. Most folks do. Comes from looking too quick and not asking the right questions. He gave a small, weary laugh. You talk like someone who's been hurt. I talk like someone who survived. Silence stretched again. Then Rufus reached behind him and pulled out a folded square of linen. It was Martha's apron. Washed, mended. I wasn't sure if you were staying, he said, voice quiet. But the girls, they started setting out a plate for you even when you weren't at the table. Figured maybe I should do the same. Her hand hovered over the apron. This doesn't mean I belong. No, he agreed. But it means you're welcome. Something inside her eased then. Not healed all the way, but loosened like stiff joints in spring thaw. That night she didn't fold the apron. She wore it. And when she served the stew, the girls looked at her like she'd always been there. And maybe, in their hearts, she had. Sometimes freedom doesn't come like lightning. It arrives in the quiet nod of a man who finally sees you and in the warm hand of a child who already did. The sun rose lazy and gold over the hills, but Martha was already up. She stood at the well pumping water, slow breath forming soft clouds in the cool dawn. She wore the apron now without thinking, creased and faded, like it had always belonged to her shape. Inside, Sadie and Ellie were still sleeping, curled like pups beneath one quilt. Rufus stepped onto the porch with a tin cup in hand, hesitating before he spoke. You sleep all right. Martha didn't turn. I don't much most nights. Habit, a beat. Then did he hurt you? It hung in the air like something too sacred to swat away. She turned, then eyes steady, the pump handle still in her grasp. No, not with fists if that's what you're asking. But I was spoken over. Sold once. Forgotten twice. Rufus looked away. Not out of shame, but respect. You don't owe me that story, no, she said gently. But I'm tired of holding it alone. And so standing by the well like a woman drawing something deeper than water, Martha told him. How she'd married a merchant's son at 19. How he praised her quietness until it became her prison. How when he died, his brother took over the farm, and her like she'd been part of the will. How she cooked and cleaned and got nothing in return but scorn and the echo of her own footsteps. How one day she simply walked away, with nothing but a tin of salt, a wool shawl, and her name. That name, she said now, her voice catching. I nearly forgot it belonged to me. Rufus nodded slow. And now she looked toward the cabin. Now 2 girls use it like it's always been part of their days. There was a long pause. Then he said almost to himself, my wife, her name was Anna, died in childbirth, took part of me with her. Martha listened without speaking, letting silence be the soft landing between wounds. I didn't know how to raise daughters, he added. I built fences instead, walls, and now they climbed right over. Martha gave a sad smile. Children are like that. They teach us how to hope again, whether we want to or not. They stood like that for a while. No music, no rush. Just 2 older hearts quietly confessing they'd been broken and weren't ashamed of the glue. And maybe, just maybe, they could be something whole again. Sometimes the truth doesn't shatter things. It stitches them. Days turned colder, and the wind started whispering of early snow. Martha wrapped the girls in wool shawls and cooked stew that stayed warm in their bellies. She stitched the tear in Sadie's coat and helped Ellie learn her letters, tracing them slowly by the fire. But with warmth comes attention. Whispers started in the town of Marrow Creek. She's too old for him. Didn't she wander here without a dime? A cook's not a wife, and a widower shouldn't forget his dead so quick. Martha heard them when she came to trade eggs. Not directly, never directly. But in the way the store clerk didn't meet her eyes. In how one woman pressed her child closer as Martha passed as if grief was a sickness she might carry. It wasn't just town. One evening, Rufus's sister rode up from the next county, a woman sharp in dress and sharper in tongue, Estelle. She stood on the porch like it belonged to her. I came to see my nieces, she said, though her eyes flicked to Martha with disdain, and see what kind of spell you've put on my brother. Martha stayed calm. There's no spell here, just kindness and chores. Estelle's gaze was hard. Don't play modest. You cook for him, care for his girls, warm his house. What next, his bed? Martha did not flinch. That's not your business. and it hasn't happened. Yet Estelle said coldly, Rufus is vulnerable. He grieves slow and loves foolish. That night Rufus said nothing. He chopped wood like the trees had insulted him. Martha gave him space, but the next morning he found her on the porch, her bag packed. I won't be spoken of like that, she said softly. Not in front of your girls. He looked at the bag, then at her. You leaving 'cause of Estelle, I'm leaving. Because I have enough scars, she replied. And I won't let them hand me new ones while I'm just learning to feel whole again. Rufus stepped forward, voice raw. You don't walk away, not from me, not from them. We want you here, Martha. I want you here. She looked at him, the hurt still in her eyes. Then show them, show everyone, that a woman like me belongs. It's not always anger that builds distance. Sometimes it's silence. And the courage to break it, that's where healing begins. Rufus didn't answer Martha with words that morning. Not immediately. Instead, he went into town. He walked straight to the church where Estelle was gossiping over tea. He asked the preacher if he could speak, and with townsfolk peeking through lace curtains, he stood at the front of the congregation and said in his gravel-worn voice, I'm not much for talking, but I reckon I better speak before folks talk louder than me. This woman, Martha June Whitlow, came to our home a stranger. She didn't ask for anything, but she gave my daughter safety, gave my house warmth, gave me peace I hadn't known since loss. If anyone's got doubts, that's theirs to carry, but in my home, in my heart, she's already family. It was quiet after that. Even Estelle didn't reply, just turned and left with her chin held tight. Back at the ranch, Martha didn't say much when he told her, just stared at the fire for a while, quiet and still. Then she said softly, I never thought someone would stand up for me like that. Rufus touched her hand. You're worth standing for. The girls came rushing in, arms full of daisies they'd picked in the frost. They laid them in Martha's apron like an offering. Mama Sadie said, not even thinking about it. The word hung in the air like music. That night, Martha tucked them in and stood for a long time at the window watching snow begin to fall. She didn't feel cold. She felt chosen, not out of duty, not out of pity, but truly, wholly, finally chosen. Sometimes it takes a lifetime of being passed by to find the one place that waits just for you. Sometimes love doesn't ride in fast on a white horse. Sometimes it arrives slowly on tired feet, in whispered words, through the kindness of small hands reaching out in faith. Martha June Whitlow didn't chase a dream. She simply stayed kind in a world that had forgotten how to be kind back. And in doing so, she found something rare, a second beginning. It wasn't just about a man learning to love again, or two girls finding someone who wouldn't leave. It was about what happens when one soul chooses to stay soft, even when life tries to make them hard. In a time and place that prize strength above all, Martha reminded us gentleness is its own kind of power. And maybe that's the lesson we can carry home from this tale, that even in our loneliest chapters, there's always a page left unturned, and someone somewhere still waiting to whisper, you're the one. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to the channel None, Wild West Saga, liking and sharing this story with someone who might need hope today. And in the comments, tell us, would you want to see what happens next in Martha's story? Or perhaps hear more tales of healing and late-in-life love? We're listening, we're here, and we're honored to share these stories with you.